Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. This is the Raegen character review. Brand new unit released to global this week. We're going to do the typical stuff here. The character overview, the base and total stat analysis, a couple other metrics leading up to the report card where we can kind of translate those stats into what effectively happens in his kit. Then with the deep dive on the class and job overview, kind of justifying some more about what you should know about him, the TMR review, and then the general thoughts, which encapsulate everything now that we've gotten a full picture of the character. Then some job-based vision card eligibility, some Esper Synergies, and weapon optimization, which I do think there are a couple to consider. Now, kicking things off here, the character overview. Brand new ice unit added to the game. Now, he is a permanent pool unit, and although 100 cost, I do obviously appreciate that he's a permanent pool unit. Does lessen the blow a little bit when you can slow build him and have opportunities to pull them in the future. Now for the jobs, they've given him the unique main job, Top Knight of Grandshell, with the Monk and Nightblade sub-jobs as well. He does equip swords, and for vision card purposes, he's considered a sword red mage class. He does equip hats, cloths, and accessories with a move of 3, jump of 1 as a 100 cost unit. Now from a weapon resistance perspective, a lot of really good ones here. Now his mastery ability does amplify 2 of these. His slash is the highest here at 25%. Strike and magic both tied at 20%, 10% to missile, and the only negative being that -10 to pierce. So overall, very, very strong weapon type resists out of the gate. From an ailment perspective, I do think he is a 50 faith unit, so you don't need to be terribly worried about being afflicted by these, but 50% to frostbite, 50% to blind are certainly ones that we see relatively prevalently, 10% to immobilize. One of the things here that you'll notice as we talk about Raegen is that he is supposed to be particularly strong against other ice teams in those mirror matchups, and so to that extent, the frostbite resistance is certainly one of the more popular ice status elements, and immobilize is commonly seen too on the limit break for Eliza, with blind obviously being popular with dark and fire and a smattering of others. Now, for the base stat overview, HP-wise, like many units post third anniversary, very high on the base HP side of things. That obviously goes very well for things that scale off of that stat. From a base attack perspective, he is the second highest in the game, only behind Flagbearer Glaciella, so essentially top of the chart there. From an agility perspective, a couple points above the average, nothing too crazy or noteworthy there. From a dexterity perspective, absolutely toward the bottom for base dexterity, but there are a lot of things in his kit that do make up for that. We'll talk about them in just a few minutes here. And then luck, finally, a little bit above average from a luck perspective. Now, as we transition those 5 charts, kind of summarizing them into one here relative to other UR units, again, no real negative deficiencies other than that dexterity stat, which does stand out. But for base stats, he starts off in a pretty good spot for at least 4 out of the 5, and in my opinion, some of the more important ones here when it comes to HP and luck and even attack. Now, when you add in the board nodes, the total stats, things of that nature, mastery abilities, there are some shifts here. Does fall a little bit to earth on the HP and attack side of things. His agility, they do give him a good bump here. Everything else relatively standard. That agility, they give him 9 points, which is just on the slightly higher edge of average, but I don't think there's anything dramatically different here. Other than that, they do kind of jip him a little bit on the board stats for the attack, which is why he falls, but base attack is very high. It's not essentially going to matter. Now, for the agility perspective, he does come in at 80 agility here, which is effectively the UR average with passives equipped. When you have those 15 and 8% vision cards equipped, he has no passives of his own to bump that, so he will stay at 80, which looks good on the blue line. It looks worse on the green line, but he's basically average for agility, which we'll talk about on the report card here as well. Now, crit hit and crit avoid, although he has that very low dexterity stat, he's got something like 28% crit rate on the board node, so he does move up significantly from where that dexterity would lead you to believe. He ends up in a pretty decent spot here for an innate critical hit rate. The critical avoidance rate, pretty much average, nothing too crazy there either. Now, from an accuracy perspective, he does have a passive you can equip to give him 25 extra accuracy. Without it, he's basically straight average here on this blue line, so it is, I mean, average in this game is kind of a bad thing. You're either good at accuracy or average, and average is means you can't hit evade, so it's bad. But when you do equip that passive, he does move up. I wouldn't say toward that like B tier of accurate units. It really does still maintain him a step behind them, but overall, it's salvageable. I think that's what I'm trying to get at here. Now, the evasion, not an evade unit in the least, don't even attempt it. Now, for the report card, effective HP, I'm going with a B plus here overall. Now, I do think he is a little bit stronger toward magic than physical, just because of that 20% magic stat. That 10% pierce is the small thing that holds him back from an effective HP perspective. He's got no innate defense or spirit or ways to boost them internally, which is noteworthy. Now, he is courage capable when I talk about other survivability metrics. He gets up to 20 AoE resistance on a buff, but no AoE resistance innately, which is kind of unique from what we see with the trend lately. He does have lots of innate chain resistance potential, which I haven't done a deep dive in the math yet. JB and I are both kind of working on that, but the long story short is that chain resistance actually is a fairly significant way to reduce damage. We've seen Alphonse benefit greatly from that, so that's just a different kind of survivability. And then he does have a heal back of HP when it falls below 50%, which is effectively 56% of his health restored due to his Transcendence, which gives him 20 healing power. Now, from the primary stat, I'm going A here. Very strong base attack, even more attack due to his passive that you can equip. He's got an innate 40 slash res pen and 40 defense pen, and you get another 20 of both with the sword. So from a damage perspective, yeah, high attack stat, lots of penetrations, you're gonna notice it. Now from an agility perspective, going with a C here, basically straight average, a couple points above it if you're not including passives, but effectively speaking, 80 agility versus the 80 average with passives. Accuracy, I'm going C plus here, and I say that because you're likely not going to have that accuracy passive all the time. It's probably 50% of the time. It's definitely a fair amount, but he does have very average accuracy without it, although you can get above average with it. As we saw, he's still kind of that step below some of the top tier, more accurate units. He does have one guaranteed hit on the sub job though, so kind of rounding up there, but I think the C plus range there is relatively accurate. Now from an evasion perspective, going with a D, not an evade unit. For movement, I'm going with a C, no way to change his innate movement. Passive abilities, I'm going with a B plus here. He has an extremely strong, unique main passive that they've given him. The others are really good for what he needs to do. I wish they did something to kind of tinker with his agility or movement, which I'll talk about in the final grade here in a moment. But overall, the other ones are actually very good passives that supplement what he wants to do very well. Now, counter ability, I'm going with an A here. He's the first in line of many characters with a new, unique kind of counter ability. It's slightly boom or bust because of the reaction block rate that exists in the game nowadays, so it's hard to really gauge, you know, how good a counter potentially is. But in concept, very, very strong. We'll talk about that in 2 slides. The overall kit, I'm going with a B. A little bit lower than I think I would have expected here. Realistically speaking, I think I'm rounding down more harshly than I should. He does have loads of utility. He is a little shorter range in nature, which can be a bad thing, but I actually think there is some upside there. And he definitely fits that brawler archetype, which is why I'm actually rounding down. That historically in the game, brawlers just are good and they're serviceable, but never are they really top tier. Only a handful of times characters like Esther, maybe Astrius, where that kind of brawler character, I think you could throw Perrine in there, really actually do the job as intended. I honestly haven't tested enough with him, and I don't know if JP has, quite honestly, either. I think JP, by this point in the timeline, was mostly spent on Full Metal and Wingstern and what they've done, so I don't think he's ever actually been tested to the full potential of what could be achieved, but we're going to talk more about that. For a final grade of a B as well, and I'm putting an asterisk on here because I say he's a great meta Swiss Army knife. He's actually going to be much higher than a B in certain circumstances. I think his ceiling will be super high when the time is right. It's just not going to be a majority of the time. Now, that's not to say he's niche. To me, niche implies that it's a very, very minute percentage of the time. And to me, it's like 40 or 50% of the time you're really getting max value. But for a character in the broad scheme of the game, you would have a high ceiling more than 50% of the time. And I do think the lack of an agility passive or a movement passive does actually hurt him, where when you have those two things in your kit, it does allow you to, A, be more flexible with the turn order and rotation of your teammates, which is a very, very strong thing, and B, when it comes to maps, being able to change your jump or your movement for buff range or jump range or whatever it may be is a very strong thing, and he lacks both of them. So for those reasons, kind of rounding down, but I think I'm being a little harsh. Now for the passive abilities here, that Hero of Aldor is the one that's exceptionally strong. 24% attack, 40 slash res pen, and 40 defense pen, and he will restore 40% of his HP when it falls below half health, and that's actually a little bit higher because of the healing power 20. Now when it comes to the other abilities here, I think it's a toss-up between Bond with Rowan and Nightblade Mastery. Bond with Rowan is really what makes him that brawler character. It's the increase in elemental chain resistance of 40, will stack with the vision card that came out with him. It's also another 12% slash and strike resistance, but the Nightblade Mastery is the one that has the accuracy on it and a second attack buff, so it's really debatable which one of these two is preferable. I think it's obviously meta dependent and who you're expecting to see. The other two I think are okay, but not even really worth talking about. Now for the counter abilities, the unique counter they've given him is the Spirit of Ares, and what this essentially does is anytime he's hit by a slash or strike damage, there is a 70% chance he'll take 20% less damage. It's kind of like a permanent protect against those two attack types. Now again, if your reaction block rate 100, this will never proc, so you'll always take full damage. That's why I say it's kind of boom or bust. But conceptually in the game, when you're talking about characters that don't have that kind of reaction block, this is very strong to reduce those kinds of damage by 20%. 70% of the time. Now look at the main job buffs. This is also where I say he's kind of a meta Swiss Army knife. His priority buff is the teammate buff here. Leave this to me. And it's 25% element resistance to 3 elements, to ice, to wind, and to dark. And so against those teams, he is obviously much, much stronger. When you're not seeing those teams, this buff obviously loses a lot of its value, and that it's only a 20% AoE res for himself, essentially, where if you're not facing these teams, those resistances means nothing for him or his teammates. So while this is very strong, obviously it's only strong 3 out of the 7 matchups that you'll see element-wise. But protecting the light of the future, that's his courage ability. It will also give himself a reaction block rate of 50 while it's in effect, while also decreasing AP consumption by 33% when it's in effect as well. So for that reason, because this main buff here, if you're not expecting this meta to have these 3 elements, you can essentially disable this. You can probably lean into one of the other buffs on his Subjobs, or lean more heavily into a creative TMR, which I do actually like. We've had a lot of characters lately that have almost too many buffs, and that you can never really get to any kind of unique or creative, rotation because of it, at least from a TMR perspective. Now, the main job offensive abilities, kind of interesting here. He's got 2 unit attacks, 2 AoE attacks. His furthest range is 4 squares away, so that's definitely shorter than average. And the AoE abilities he have are cross-shaped. They're not these large diamonds, so it's bucking the trend a little bit. Obviously, many of you seeing this for the first time will note that he has a fire type attack, which we'll talk about when we get to in a second, but Azure Dyed Blade is a defense break of 25, very short range, though at only 2 squares away. Crimson Blade Strike, though, is an exceptionally good ability. That's an AoE courage removal. And yes, it is fire type attack. So all of your ice attack up mods that you might have from vision cards or teammates or who knows what will not apply to this ability, only slash attack. And when it does attack the enemy, it will scale off their fire resistance, not the ice resistance. So there is some unique mechanics going on here. There is a big buff to the modifier when it attacks an ice or a wind character. Bumps this modifier from 165 to 225. So again, a little bit boom or bust depending upon the type of enemy you're facing. That's why I said in those mirror ice matchups, he actually has a niche of being able to do very well against those ice characters. Now, Azure Blade Strike is the second of these double hits as well, which I want to mention. All 3 of these final abilities are double hits. Now, this one is a unit-based attack. It's defense penetration of 40. For those of you following with the mental math so far, he's got 40 defense pen innately, 20 from his weapon, and 40 from this ability, which means for 3 turns, he will have 100% defense penetration. That's exceptionally strong. It will also decrease enemy agility by 20% for 3 turns, leading up finally to Mountain Dive, which is an AoE ability that will dispel, haste, and protect while also being another double hit. So there's, again, a lot of short range abilities, not a lot of enormous AoEs, but there's so much AoE resistance in the game right now. I like the fact that Azure Blade Strike is a unit-oriented ability. I think he's going to do surprisingly more damage than people are expecting because everyone's gearing up so highly for AoE resistance. Now, as we look at the main job here, I don't like either of these abilities, quite frankly. I think they're very bad, just by the nature of their range and shape alone, in that they are direct line abilities and only squares of 2 and 3 away. Mods of 165%. Yeah, there's a status effect of Frostbite, which is cool, but he's not a 97 faith unit, and 25% is too low to be meaningfully reliable. The healing power down one is cool too. That's another double hit in his kit, but I don't think it's stronger than the next sub-job, which we're going to talk about, which is the Monk. Now, there's 3 things here that I particularly like. First one is Surge Strike, where that's his 100% hit chance ability, and although it's only 3 squares away, that's where most of his abilities are anyway, so it's not like he's drastically changing his positioning by getting this attack off, so that is a good thing. But Chakra is by far one of the most important Swiss Army knives in his kit, where it's a flat 40% restoration for himself and allies, 32% TP, and regen as well for himself and allies. And one of the nice things about this is that when you consider the 20% healing power up that he has, this is going to do more than that 40% HP restore. But when you consider he's also a very short range attack character, that means that there are often times where if a teammate takes a hit and Raegen's not in range to, follow up on that yet, there is a very good chance that his AI will go ahead and cure that teammate. Or if he's got a 0% hit chance on an evade unit and he's not in range to use the 100% chance hit, he will likely use this on a teammate or himself that's low health as well. So this is a very, very strong part of his brawler identity, which I do think has some very, very good upside. Not even talking about the fact of second fights here when you go into a second Guild War attack where he can cure a teammate using this as well. So very, very strong from that perspective. which finally leads us to the Nightblade subjob. This is obviously a very popular subjob. I only really like the maiming slash on it for the extra utility of the reduced counter chance and healing power. Outside of that, I don't really think the subjob offers anything more than the monk job would. Now it brings us finally to the Limit Break, the Dream, and the Mastery. Now this Limit Break, another multi-hit ability, it is a triple hit, 4 squares away. It's decreased slash resistance by 38%. For 3 turns to target, obviously very powerful at 43 AP. That goes very well with a lot of the slashers that we've seen enter the game as of late. Now for the Mastery ability, this is where it gets that extra 10% slash and magic resistance and an innate 20 reaction block rate. So combine that with his Courage, he'll be at 70 permanently as long as Courage is active. And then from the Dream ability upgrade, he's got 20 healing power and 30% acquired AP. So that extra acquired AP and the reduced AP consumption from Courage obviously meshes together very well for keeping his damage uptime up. Now we look at the TMR review. This is a cloth type. I would honestly say a little bit above average statistically for what most cloths are. 422 HP, 15 defense. That being said, the TMR skill itself is very niche. It's a teammate buff, 2 usages. It is a 40% attack buff, but it's also 25 fire attack and 25 ice attack. And so while that's very good for Raegen, when it comes to buffing a teammate, obviously that's a little niche where you're not going to be pairing with fire units, number one. That is not a synergy that Raegen really has. If anything, it's really more for those ice teammates, but even then that kind of overlaps with what Alaya offers for ice attack up. I know even Snow's TMR is ice attack up, so there's a couple other ways to get this modifier that, although this might be really good for Raegen, I don't see much more application outside of it. Now for the general thoughts, very meta dependent again to realize that top ceiling. The buff being the 25% to ice, wind, and dark means he's really best against those. The Crimson Blade having that 225% mod versus ice and wind. And then this is, I think, very noteworthy. He's semi-unique in that he has that 20% strike res up to 32% with that passive. Now, as we've seen in a major uptick in strike units and strike damage, I think he's one of the few modern era units that's really equipped to go toe-to-toe with them. There's obviously other units that can beat it, but innately speaking, I think that's a very strong feather in his cap given what we're expected to see for the next couple months potentially. Now, he does lack some of the innate survivability attributes of many others, particularly a barrier or some kind of AoE resistance. And although barriers are broken quite easily nowadays, most characters still typically have multi-elements of their survivability. He's really limited to that Courage, the 40 element chain res, and more of that on his vision card, so being able to reduce that kind of damage. And I'm really reaching for straws here, but I'm assuming that 20% agility down on that unit attack, and his Dispel Haste is supposed to sort of like reduce the amount of turns the enemies gets, which means less damage you take because they get less turns. I'm really reaching there, but he does lack some of the other typical survivability outside of just very strong resistances and innate effective HP. Now, I do think he's more short range than I think is ideal, but I do think it's promising that you have some more opportunities for buffs, and as you talked about Chakra being able to potentially heal a teammate before he's in range to attack someone, I do think has some great upsides. I do think he has a good balance of unit and AoE attacks, and his unit-based attack is obviously extremely good damage, being at 100 defense pen essentially permanently. And again, just reiterating that 60 slash res pen and 60 defense pen, very, very strong on both those attributes, kind of just beating a dead horse here at that point. I do think he brings good slash chain potential with 3 double hits on the main job and a triple hit on the limit break. Obviously that goes really well when you're trying to just do like ice slash chains, but I think just slash chains in general nowadays, we are getting more rainbow comps that he obviously does very well with that. I do think the Monk Chakra ability is low-key a huge upside for him. Also helps that his 100% hit chance is also on that sub job, so you can overlap both of those strong points together. And just to kind of go off topic for a moment, but I actually think he's an amazing fit with Bradley of all characters, where there's obviously the immediate synergy where if you bring an ice unit with an earth unit, anytime someone wants to throw wind at Bradley, Raegen will shut that down near immediately. That being said, I also do think they do things to complement each other. Bradley has Re-Raise remove, while Raegen has Courage remove. Bradley has mostly AoE attacks as his strongest, and Raegen comes with a unit attack as his strongest. Bradley doesn't necessarily have any strong imperils like Raegen does. Raegen has the 38% slash imperil on limit break. Bradley's got no way to remove protect. Raegen can. Raegen has no way to break barriers, but Bradley does. And obviously, when we talk about chaining potential, they both have some double hits in their kit, so they can slash chain off each other at least. So I do think there is a very good potential synergy there where they can kind of compensate for what each other lacks should you try to be bold and put them together. Now for the job-based vision cards, there's obviously a couple strong ones here. At least Meeting in the Moonlight and A Party for All are both that valuable 20 AoE resistance. The hero card brings some of that slash attack up for him. His own vision card is very strong for that elemental chain res, which he has innately. This is more of like a sub vision card though, but on the main slot, if you happen to be able to fit it in, 15 accuracy is very, very powerful for Raegen, also next to 3 agility. Overall, I think there's something here to work with when it comes to what these vision cards offer, and that's not including the 2 future JP vision cards. The Howlet one here obviously is magic oriented, but within a team, Raegen will get more strike resistance, so even better against that type of attack. But then you also have the Sildra vision card, which again, critical rate, which you do want to help him a little bit with, but more than anything, the slash attack res pen as well, which would get him up to the 70s or 80s or even near 100 permanently, whether main slot or sub slot. Now for the Esper Synergies, you want to focus primarily on the slash attack and human killer because he does have both fire and ice attacks in the kit. I think accuracy is another very strong one to build for, and then after that, you can try to prioritize ice and fire attack and then matchup specific things as well. And those of you that know the channel are obviously aware of what I'm going to recommend right off the bat here is the Esper recommendations. These are definitely the best 3 Espers for him. That being said, if you were trying to get a little creative or you couldn't use one of these or a teammate is already using the one you want, a couple fire options that I think are noteworthy, and there are some non-fire ones, but really specifically Phoenix and Death Machine. I think both of these offer something unique in that Phoenix is obviously more bulky with the defense, extra strike res, and the fire attack. And then Death Machine is interesting in that it has slash attack nodes, not fire attack nodes, but it's got slash attack nodes, defense, missile res, crit evade, however you want to build that. So I do like both of these to really fit that brawler style of him. And honorable mention, there are 2 ice ones that I think are okay. I actually do like the glacial one here, where he has the luck nodes that will definitely help Raegen's accuracy, slash attack nodes, but more than anything, the wind resistance here, which again, if we're trying to make Raegen be that character that can functionally solo a 3-person win team, this is a great Esper to potentially do that. And Fenrir is obviously great for building into more of that magic resistance with that innate 20% that he has, while also bringing a lot of slash attack nodes as well. So overall, you got enough to pick from. There's probably some others, but I think this is pretty safe. And then finally, the weapon optimization. I do think there are a handful of options here. The Azure Glacier that they introduced, I think is probably my favorite though. I love the 26% crit rate on it. I love that it's defense pen of 20 and slash attack res pen of 20, while also giving him this CT up of 200 when your HP falls below 20%. Overall, this is a very well-rounded sword that really amplifies his damage potential to the next level. Now, I do think the Blood Sword, which is one of the newer unique weapons that came into the game, also fits very well with him, where when you consider the special effect here is to absorb 15% of the damage done when you get a critical hit. Again, if you're building for that crit hit rate, he's got that healing power up. You talk about that brawler style, you still maintain 30 mods on this weapon, 204 attack. I actually think it's a pretty good one for him. And I do think the Mythgraven Blade is always an honorable mention just for the decrease and AP consumption of 20. Very strong attack stat as well. I think it's slightly inferior to those first 2. And then finally, if you want to go kind of nuts specifically against squishier characters where you may not need all that defense pen, the Flame Tongue is a great option here where you still get accuracy of 10, slash attack 15, and fire attack 30. Now that'll only affect his courage removal ability, but alternatively the Ice Brand will have ice attack 30, the slash attack 15, and has its own defense pen of 10 on here, so you can save yourself that Truststone passive. Overall, there's a slew of swords here to pick from, depending upon how much defense pen you want to give him, how much modifiers you want to give him, whether or not you want to prioritize the courage removal ability. There's a lot to play with, but last but not least, another honorable mention, the Lazalia Royal Guard Standard Issue Sword, where again, 28 accuracy on this and 38 modifiers for Raegen. So overall, at least it's kind of that middle ground from Ice Brand, where you still maintain a fair amount of modifier, while at least giving yourself a little bit extra accuracy. But that's the Raegen review in the nutshell. There's a lot to dissect with this character. Obviously comes at a tough time where everyone is pretty bleak when it comes to Visior expenditure, so I very much doubt in the short term you're going to see a lot of him or really realize the full upside of him. But I think as the game goes on, as meta starts to change, I think this is a very, very good character that will help be a great addition to a variety of different teams overall. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll talk to you all soon.